This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
But that brings me to my next guest, Tom Philipson, who you all know. Tom, he was the chief economist for Donald Trump during his first term, was in the Oval Office many times with Donald Trump, much more than I was, and knows how the man operates, gave Donald Trump excellent economic advice in those last 2 or 3 years that he was in office. So, Tom, thanks so much for joining this afternoon.
Good to be with you, Steve.
So, Tom, a lot I want to discuss with you, but can we first start? I do want to ask you about the tariff issue, but first of all, can you tell our audience, because you were in the Oval Office with Donald Trump almost every day when you were running the Council of Economic Advisors for him, what is it like to be with him in the Oval Office? What do you think about the way he operates? I've been in there many times. It's the guy seems to have 4 or 5 things going on at the same time, but he is an amazing decision maker. But what are some of your takeaways with your time in the Oval Office with Donald Trump?
Well, I think my main takeaways is that he kind of liked disagreement among his advisors.
That's so true. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the way I think about it is, think about a court. We have, very biased 2 parties. The defendant and plaintiffs go in with their own evidence, and they shoot down the other side all the time. And out of that comes some kind of truth of this competitive information gathering, essentially.
Right.
And I think it's similar in the debate in the ovals. Like, if you have people all agreeing, you're not going to get as good information as if people disagree, because then you can kind of go through arguments from both sides. And I think,
by the way, Tom, you're making a really important point, because in many, I was in the Oval Office a couple times with George Bush, and I've talked to folks who work for other presidents, and it's not always like that. In fact, oftentimes it's just the presidents surrounding themselves with yes men. That's not the case with Trump.
Yeah, and especially it wasn't the case in the first administration. It might be more the case in the second administration, people, but I think in the first administration, we have a lot of debates or not, arguments, which I think is healthy. I came from, academia where people are very rude to each other, especially at University of Chicago.
Right.
So I was kind of used to that environment. And a lot of people are kind of uncomfortable, but I think he kind of thrives on it because it does generate better information when people disagree.
So I wanted to ask you about one of your seminal studies that you did, Tom Philipson. I've neglected to mention University of Chicago. I think one of the top economists in the country, no question about that. And you did a study 2 or 3 years ago. You and I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal about this, about how the fact that the drug price controls that were imposed by Joe Biden reduced the amount of innovation in the introduction of new drugs and has delayed them. And that you said that this is causing a lot more deaths, as I recall. So can you summarize why drug price controls are a bad idea?
Yeah, essentially innovation is, the biotech sector in the U.S. is amazing. And it's not only because, we have great universities, et cetera, which is partly where most of the innovation comes from. But it's also because we have we have more free market. We don't have a full free market because we have Medicare and Medicaid that control prices quite heavily, and they're half of healthcare spending roughly. Mm-hmm. But we have more free market pricing than other countries. So basically 75% of overall earnings of biopharma comes from the U.S. market, even though we're, 23% of world GDP or something. So we're overrepresented in how much innovative returns we provide essentially to the medical innovation industry across the world, because everyone is selling here. That's the goal. Even if you sit in Sweden, right, you're not innovating for 9 million Swedes. You're innovating essentially for the U.S. market. So the whole world innovation, in all innovation investments across the world depend on the U.S. market.
Yes.
So when they're coming in and shutting down pricing here, obviously that's going to be a response which is going to damage the future health of, future generations. It might be great for the current seniors. It's Medicare controls prices, but it's certainly not going to be good for the next generation seniors who are going to have, diseases that they can't treat.
So people, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but, when I've talked about this in the past, people will call in and say, well, wait a minute, it's not fair that the people in Mexico or some of the people in Asia or other countries are getting American drugs at a lower price than we pay. And I never know quite how to answer that criticism. What do you say about that?
Well, they have price controls. You have single payers in Europe, and the reason they can do that, and they have actually good reasons for doing it, because if you take a small country like Luxembourg or whatever, they will not affect world returns of a particular product, right? You can literally shut down Luxembourg and nothing happens to medical innovation, because there's such a small share of world sales. And world sales is what drives innovation, essentially. Now you go to the U.S., so for those countries in Europe, small European countries, even though Europe is roughly the same GDP as the U.S. taken together, all European countries, there's a bunch of small countries, so acting unilaterally on their own, they have no trade-off in setting price controls, low prices, because innovation doesn't suffer, because they're not contributing to the, to the world sales. So U.S. is a big country, a rich country. And so price controls in the U.S. are much different or much more harmful to U.S. citizens than, let's say, Swedish controls are to Swedish citizens. So it's very, very easy to understand why they're doing it. But the reason they're lower is because they're basically pricing these products below their value, because it's a government price. It's not a market price.
Is there anything we can do about that?
Well, we tried. We had the most favored nation type of regulations that we were circulating and thinking about in the first administration, meaning you can't set price lower than the U.S. price in other countries or the U.S. Medicare or Medicaid price, essentially, in other countries. There's been some discussions. I think, this comes back to, more unilateral trade agreements with the big markets, Germany, France, and UK. We have to impose some this on them and have some other trade-offs, and tariffs is one, but there's other trade-offs that you can invoke if they're going to have this free riding on the U.S. market.
So I was thinking when you were talking and explaining this that this leads right into the other thing I wanted to talk to you about this afternoon, Tom Philipson, and that is the fact that Trump has these new tariffs, and that Trump has used tariffs as a kind of bargaining tool and negotiating tool. And you seem like you're comfortable with that. Maybe me a little less so, although I certainly see the objective what Trump is doing. But my question is, Trump could basically say to the Europeans, look, if you're not going to pay for the fair share of these drugs, then we're going to hit you with a tariff. What do you think about something like that?
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the way I think about this. And you and I probably agree that if he threatens and doesn't use tariffs, that's a great thing. You and I probably agree on that.
Yes.
Right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
The question is when he uses them. But there's a lot of sort of Reagan-style economists who are all for, strength or peace through strength in the military space. That I think is a very strong analogy with tariffs, because in the military we build up nuclear capabilities that we never used in 80 years, but they've been extremely they've been extremely useful. So you didn't use them, just like you're not using certain tariffs. Yeah. You didn't use the nuclear weapons, but because we had them, we got our way in a lot of situations.
Well, it's so funny you should say that, because our mutual friend Arthur Laffer always says you want to spend a little bit more on the defense, than you have to, because the cost of not having enough defense is so high.
But then you go, so we spend 14% of our federal budget, or maybe 3.5% of our GDP on building up this threat that we haven't used. And we used our military, obviously, in other situations, but we haven't used the nuclear capabilities, right? So we built that up. It's very costly to build up that threat. Now you go to tariffs, and tariffs, we already have a working economy, and the threat is you can't trade with us in our great economy. If it's unused, just as nuclear weapons have been unused, it's a great threat, and that's a cheap threat as opposed to a costly threat, which is the military. So it's a very cheap threat.
Yeah. What do you make then of the decision by Donald Trump that was announced yesterday on these tariffs? And our friends at the Wall Street Journal, you're a regular writer in the Wall Street Journal editorial page, as I am. They say, I'm just quoting them, the dumbest trade war in history.
Well, I think if it lasts, that's different. I expect a lot of concessions the next week or month from Mexico and Canada. So this is basically, you got to be serious. You got to have a credible threat. If you just threat people and you don't go through with it, people don't take you seriously, right? So is the threat credible? Here he's showing, yes, it is credible. Oh, he's serious. Now we make some concessions to get rid of this major issue. It's a much bigger issue for them, right, than it is for us. The thing with us is, we're a self-reliant economy compared to many other economies. We trade mostly with ourselves as opposed to with foreigners, which is not true of many other countries.
So I'm agreeing with you almost everything you've said, and so the one thing I guess that bothers me about the latest decision is, and we only have a couple minutes left, Tom. I appreciate you coming on. That's Tom Philipson of University of Chicago. He was also the senior economist for Donald Trump in his first term. Explain this to me. Why is it that Trump is suggesting higher tariffs on Canada, which is a friendly nation and our northern neighbor, than he is on China, when China is clearly the enemy?
Well, that's a tough call, but also I think he clearly has as a primary purpose to control the border with these tariffs, right? So he's not trying to control the border with Canada, because Canada doesn't sit on our border with China. I mean, China doesn't sit on our border. So these are border issues that is his, that's his number one concern, and that's why he won the election, essentially. So if he can't implement his border policies, our neighbors are not cooperating, then he can't fulfill his main. So you think that we just in the last 30 seconds we have, so you're okay with what Trump is doing? You think this story will have a happy ending? I think there were going to be huge concessions because, Mexico, 75% of the exports is to U.S. Canada, I think it's 66% of their exports. They cannot engage in a trade war. There's no way they're going to be, going. Yeah, they can't. Tom Philipson, thank you so much for joining us. Great insights on the economy, on trade.
Here's John Katsimatidis Jr.
Are you paying too much for your home or business heating oil? My family owns and operates United Metro Energy, and we can offer you a lower price and better service right now. No other heating oil company can match our tremendous buying power. We own our own refinery, our own storage tanks, and the largest fleet of company-owned trucks.
We get a 20-cent a gallon tax credit with United Metro Energy's biofuel.
We're a community-conscious, family-run business. We're here for you 24/7. Contact me anytime.
Email john@umecny.com.